Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Faith in Place event this evening. My name is Reverend Brian Souter. I'm the President and Executive Director of Faith in Place. It is a great joy and delight to say hello to you via the Zoom screen, via our Facebook accounts. You are here gathering with us for a fantastic evening for learning more information about the COVID-19 vaccine, how it came together. We have one of the leading experts, Dr. Heather Prendergast, with us tonight. We are excited if you're new to Faith in Place and maybe joining us for the first time for this event. Faith in Place is a group of people that we believe that we as people of faith and diverse spirituality are to be the leaders of environmental justice in our communities. We do that through education, connection, advocacy, and our big picture vision is healthier communities. And we know that public health is such an important element of us thriving and flourishing together in our communities as we seek to worship and play and eat good food and to be together in community. We at Faith in Place want to champion that cause and work with you to champion that cause further. And so tonight is all about learning more about the COVID-19 vaccine. Many of you know that Faith in Place's theme this year is rooted in healing and the magnification of our public health crisis through the COVID pandemic in 2020, along with the murdering of George Floyd and the magnification of the racial disparities that exist, all continue to connect the dots to the climate justice that we seek to advance together. And so tonight we're going to take that a little deeper. And it's my joy to pass it over to our MC for this evening, and that is Faith in Place's very own Communications Director, Elena Bettis. Elena Bettis not only brings you all of Faith in Place's communications with her strong communications team, but she comes from a background where not only does she have experience in religion and education and communications, but also has a master's of public health. So we're very delighted that Elena is with us tonight to facilitate our conversation with our special guest of the evening. So Elena, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Welcome, everyone. As Brian said, I am Elena. I am the Communications Director for Faith in Place. And because my background is in public health, I'm very excited to help facilitate tonight's discussion. Vaccines have been around now for over 200 years. The first one was developed to prevent smallpox, which is a disease that killed an average of 3 of every 10 people infected. Because of vaccines in 1980, the World Health Assembly declared the world free of smallpox. Since the mass distribution of vaccines started in the 1940s, fear of infection from polio and measles and many other diseases has been eradicated. Vaccines have literally changed the world, saving lives, improving health, and quality of life for millions worldwide. However, vaccines also bring with them fear. A history of racism in clinical trials and medical treatment, along with vaccine misinformation, makes people concerned about the efficacy and the effects of vaccines. Now, as the entire world grapples with how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccines again have taken center stage as the quickest and most effective way to reduce deaths and slowly transition away from social isolation. However, their development and distribution bring with them many questions. Tonight, we're making space to ask these questions. Is it safe? For who? How is it developed? What about long-term side effects? We want to bring health back to our communities and hope that tonight can collectively help us get one step closer. First, though, I want to thank our co-hosts who helped share about this event with their communities. A big shout out to First Presbyterian Church of Champaign, Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church, Vernon Park Church of God, Greater St. John's, United in Faith Lutheran Church, and The Way. Also, following our discussion tonight, we're going to share a 3-minute survey, and 2 of the respondents who fill out the survey are going to win $50 gift certificates, so make sure you take 3 minutes to fill that out for us. So now I am honored to introduce our special guest for the night, Dr. Heather Prendergast, Professor, Associate Dean of Clinical Affairs, and Vice Chair of Academic Affairs at the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Dr. Prendergast is also one of the leaders of COVID research in Chicago, as well as an expert in minority health. She started her studies at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana for undergrad and finished her medical degree, Master's in Public Health, and Master's of Science at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her research was focused on minority health, and we are grateful she is sharing her expertise with us tonight. So we're honored to have her here and help us better understand the risks and benefits of the COVID-19 vaccines, as well as how diversity was considered in their development and the clinical trials. Dr. Prendergast will share a short presentation on the vaccine, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. So please use the chat function in Zoom to share questions as she's presenting and during the discussion, and we will use that to facilitate the discussion after her presentation. So thanks so much for joining us tonight, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Prendergast.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you to Reverend Sauter and Faith in Place, the organization, for this wonderful invitation to just come and just talk about all things COVID. You know, this is unprecedented times that we're facing with this pandemic, and so a lot of questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to just come and talk, answer your questions. As Elena mentioned, I have a very quick, short PowerPoint that I just would like to review just to kind of set the framework for our discussion. I want to make sure that everyone leaves here with a greater understanding of not only more about the COVID pandemic, but also about the vaccine. So with that, as I mentioned, you can advance to the next slide. So these, without a doubt, this is nothing new in that this has been unprecedented, what we've been facing over the past year. It's hard to believe that it's been a year. And just one thing that I really like to stress at the beginning is that every single person, regardless of your race, your age, your ethnicity, your job, everyone has the potential to be affected by the coronavirus. The coronavirus does not discriminate. You know, however, we do know and we have seen that there has been a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And so we've seen higher rates of hospitalizations and deaths among these communities. And if you look on the screen on your far left, there is, this is an age-adjusted hospitalization rate for basically the first half of the corona pandemic. And you can see there's a significant disparity there. You can see higher rates, significantly higher rates, and sometimes 4 to 5 times among individuals of color. If you look on the right, you see a graphic, and this is our data here in Chicago. And you can see that you can have cases, again, regardless of age, race, ethnicity. However, if you look to the right half of the graphic, you see a disproportionate increase in the number of deaths. Next slide. And so in addition, February was Heart Awareness Month, right? And so, you know, we all know the emotional challenges and tolls that the coronavirus has had on us, not only our families, but our, city, our communities. But, the coronavirus has actually had a physical toll on our bodies, right? And in large part because the coronavirus uses the same receptor to enter the body that we use to control blood pressure. And so that's one of the reasons, even though most of the devastating effects are, respiratory, we know that you can have a wide range of symptoms because we have these receptors all over our body. So that kind of explains, how the coronavirus uses our own receptors to enter into our cells. So it definitely has worsened our heart health. Next slide. And when you look at the underlying conditions that corona patients have, the vast majority of them have hypertension as a risk factor. Now, this does not mean because you have hypertension that you will have a complication from the coronavirus. It just means that you're at a higher risk. And so if you look, there are certain underlying conditions that may put a person at a higher risk for developing complications. Those would include hypertension, obesity, cardiovascular disease, lung disease, and kidney disease. Next slide. And so this is me, and this is my quote. You won't see it on TV, but this is really how I felt. And, as an ER doctor that's been on the front line for the entire pandemic, I can honestly say, after witnessing so much death and despair over the first half of the pandemic, and even to this day, even though we've seen a decline in some of the hospitalizations, it was, I can honestly say that 3-4 months into this, I could not imagine how we would get out of it. It seemed like there was no end in sight. And then right around the time in the fall, right around where we were having the second surge, we started to hear some of the results of the preliminary results from the trials. And I have to say that, I was unsure, but it wasn't until I actually started to dig more deeply into the studies and the trials and the vaccine development that I really honestly felt that hope had arrived. That was the first time in months that I thought, dear God, there, hope has arrived. There's a way out. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so it was because, I knew that initially I was on that, I was in that category of being unsure, that I said, I wanted to do whatever I could to help other people understand more about, what we had been dealing with from the coronavirus and the vaccine, and just make myself available to answer questions. So next slide. And so just like, the coronavirus has presented us with so many challenges, right? And on the left side of your screen, you see the number of deaths, and this is Chicago. And you can see the location of the deaths across the city of Chicago. And then if you look on the graphic to your right, you'll see, and this is about a little over a month and a half ago, that you look at the areas that have had completed the vaccinations, and you see that there is an opportunity here. There's a significant mismatch there. Next slide. And so I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we don't acknowledge the reasons for hesitancy amongst some of our, some individuals. And in large part, we know, particularly in the African-American community, that a lot of that hesitancy is rooted in some medical mistrust from the Tuskegee trials. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. We have to make ourselves available to answer questions. And this is an article that I often like to reference, and it's Dr. South is also an ER doctor. And she actually characterizes quite well in this article how she, like many of us, especially as physicians of color, not everyone was initially on board, because it seemed like it seemed as if the vaccine just came out of nowhere. But when we really looked into it and understood, it really there were no shortcuts that were taken. And so this article really talks about her journey and how, her, like many of us, myself included, moved from a position of confidence and being comfortable with the vaccine. Next slide. And so one of the most convincing things for me was when really looked at the trial. And so I really want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the diversity in the COVID vaccine trials. We know that the trials were conducted, but let's talk specifically about some of the details. So the trial, the Pfizer vaccine, was tested in about 43,000 individuals. 21,000 received the vaccine, 21,000 received the placebo. The Pfizer trial was a multinational study in that it was conducted in Argentina, Brazil, South Africa. 76% of the trial participants were from the United States. 82% were white, 28% were Hispanic or Latinx, and that equates to about 5,000 participants. 10% were African American. That's about 2,000. It was a little under 2,000 participants. 4% were Asian, and there were 0 hospitalizations in anyone that received the vaccine. There were no serious infections, and there was no deaths in anyone that received the vaccine, Pfizer vaccine, that participated in a vaccine trial. About half of the participants were female, and about 22%, 21% were over the age of 65. And if you recall back on the slide where I showed some of the underlying conditions that put you at a higher risk for complications, they made sure and included individuals that had some of these risk factors. Next slide. The Moderna trial was exclusively trialed in the United States. It was a US-based trial. Again, similar numbers to that we saw with the Pfizer vaccine. A little less than half were female, 82% were white. Again, you had 20% Hispanic or Latinx, 10% African-American, and 4% Asian. In the Moderna trial, because it was conducted primarily exclusively in the United States, they also included 25% of the participants were healthcare workers. They had at least 22% had at least one of the high-risk conditions, and 4% had 2 of the high-risk positions. And then they also included about 82% of the participants were individuals that were deemed to have occupational risk for greater exposure if they develop COVID. And again, in this trial, which also had about 21,000 individuals that received the vaccine, there were no hospitalizations and there were no deaths. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna used the mRNA technology. And so the mRNA technology does not include, any live virus. It's essentially mRNA stands for messenger RNA. So essentially, what the vaccine does is uses a copy of the virus, and so it is a messenger, and there's no risk of developing the coronavirus from the vaccine because it does not contain any of the live virus. Next slide. And then finally, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was just approved emergency use authorization earlier this month. That also was a trial that was done in several countries. 44% of the trial participants were from the United States. Again, they had about 48,000 participants. The demographics is actually 74% were white, 13% were African-American, and 15% were Latinx or Hispanic, 6% were Asian, and they had about a little less than half of them had at least one of the high-risk conditions. Now, the one thing to note about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses an older platform that has been used before, uses the AdVac platform. And so that's been used in that's the platform that was used in the Ebola vaccine or the Zika vaccine. Next slide. And so the other point that I like to make is around the diversity of the scientists. And so, one thing that I often hear is that the vaccine just came about too quickly, right? And so this mRNA technology is not anything new. The scientist on the far left, Dr. Kareko, she actually started working on this mRNA technology in 1980 and actually received her PhD around her work around the mRNA technology. Dr. Corbett is the African-American woman. She is actually the lead scientist for at the NIH that worked on the vaccine. She's a virologist, and so had committed her entire career to the study of viruses. And she led, along with her team, the vaccine development for the NIH. Next slide. And so we have a ways to go about rebuilding trust, but, I think that it's really, no one wants to be ill. No one wants to develop the coronavirus. And so I think it's just a matter of having opportunities like this where we can listen and engage in conversation and share information. Next slide. And so let's talk about the vaccine. So now there are a number of different sites. UI Health has a arena. Next slide. Cook County has many locations and a lot of mass vaccination sites. The good news is that we have a new administration at the federal level, and there is a commitment and action around getting as many vaccines into the arms of as many people. And so we have seen a significant increase in supply, which is great. So next slide. There are, options, to get the vaccine through your different pharmacies. Listed on the screen, you see some examples. And again, as I mentioned, the supply is increasing. So I know there was a bit of a bottleneck before in that the supply was somewhat limited, but that is improving on a daily basis. Next slide. These are just some more options. If you ZocDoc, they have you can go on there. Once they confirm your eligibility, they can point you to wherever the vaccines are available. There's the United Center, Rush, Amita, a lot of other areas that are listed on the screen. Next slide. And then finally, I want to end with Protect Chicago. And if you think back to a couple of slides ago when I showed that the disparity in the COVID-related deaths and the vaccination rates, Protect Chicago Plus is really designed to help, make sure that there's some health equity around the vaccine distribution. And so Protect Chicago really is about getting vaccine into those communities that have lower rates of initial vaccination. And we understand that, as I shared, there are a number of reasons for that, but want to make sure that everyone who wants the vaccine can get the vaccine. Next slide. And so Protect Chicago has about, I think it's 15 different communities. They're listed here. I won't read them all, but individuals residing in these neighborhoods, there are dedicated efforts underway to ensure that members of these communities are getting the vaccine. Next slide. And so this is, every time I update the slide, it changes, which is a good thing. And so we, as many may be aware, the mayor and the governor have actually, announced that are moving into 1C. We're slightly ahead of where we had anticipated. And so, it says phase 2 won't start till the end of May. They're actually thinking that may be, by the end of April and maybe early May. So that's the good news, because once we're in phase 2, it's everyone, not just essential workers, or there really are no limitations once we get to phase 2, which will be exciting. Next slide. And I think that was the last slide. So with that, I'm ready to take all of your questions.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I had a few people email questions in advance, so we will start with those, and then everyone else, you're more than welcome to chat questions, which I am watching the chat for. So Dr. Prendergast, someone wrote in and said that they have a pre-existing medical condition, and they were wondering, they will consult their primary care physician, but they wanted to know what your recommendation is for those with cancer, autoimmune diseases. Is the vaccine safe and effective? Should everyone get it?
Yes. So that is a great question. And, anyone that we specifically want individuals with pre-existing conditions to get vaccinated, right? And our patients that have, or individuals that have cancer or any kind of compromised immune system, are at a higher risk of of complications from getting the coronavirus, right? Because it does take over the immune system. And so definitely those individuals it would be recommended for them to get the vaccine. Fortunately, there are very, few contraindications for getting the vaccine. And that's really if you have a severe allergy, anaphylaxis. And even then, it's just recommended that you get it, and have a prolonged observation period, right? So there are very few people that would not qualify to get the vaccine. And just a indicator of how safe the vaccine is perceived to be, one of the highest bars that you can overcome is in pregnancy, right? We're very, very, very cautious about anything, about medications or anything that's given to a pregnant woman. And so, the vaccine has received, approval from the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So that's a pretty high bar to cross. So that's another reassuring regarding the safety, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I'll take, Terry shared a question in the chat. What can be done to ease people's mind on getting the vaccine?
So, right now, I think we're up to 85 million people that have received the vaccine. I received the vaccine back in December. And, I know so many people, I've seen people, and I've also seen people, I've seen life before the vaccine and the number of deaths. And, when I look at the vaccine is safe. If there was something that was horribly wrong with the vaccine, we would know it at this point, right? And so, and it is very safe. And so, if I'm recommending it to my family and to my children. And so, of course, I definitely would not be putting people in harm's way if I did not feel that it was the safe thing to do. And no one wants to get coronavirus, right? And no one wants to have any of the complications. So I think, one of the best things about getting the vaccine for me as an ER doctor was just a peace of mind. I'm still wearing my mask, but just understanding that, for me at this point, by being fully vaccinated, the risk of me, having to develop a serious infection or dying has been removed, right? And so, and I could say that pretty confidently, and they're still following these 80,000 patients that got the vaccine, and people are still doing well. So that's reassuring.
Great. And speaking to that, we had a question come in about the pace at which it was developed. And I know you shared a little bit about the history of mRNA vaccines being used for a long period of time, but I was hoping you could speak a little bit to, we haven't been testing the vaccine for a long period of time. So for those concerned with long-term side effects, what would you say to them?
Right. So the way that the messenger RNA, you are right. We don't have long-term data, right? Because this is a brand new pandemic. But what we do know we know a lot about the technology in that it has been around. It was, they started working on this in 1980. And the way that the messenger RNA works, it uses a copy, right? And so there's no live virus. There's no preservatives in the vaccine, right? It uses a fat molecule to basically enter into, as a vehicle, and it's in the body and it's out. It's a copy, right? So we know the ingredients, we know how it works, and we know that there's no lingering effects from it, right? The main thing why we have folks monitored or for at least 15 minutes is because, of any kind of allergic reaction, but not because of, necessarily concerns about interaction with any, with the body at a prolonged state, right? So, it's the participants in the vaccine trial are still being monitored. And, it will be pretty soon we'll have at least a year's worth of data. And, even though it appears that things happen at a very quick speed, there were no shortcuts taken, right? The bar was not lowered because we were in a pandemic. And so they had to still use the same clearances at the FDA to get approved. So we should have the same, confidence that because there wasn't any, there weren't any, oh, let's make an exception because we're in a pandemic. That did not happen. And so the same bar that had to be crossed for all vaccines was in place here. So that to me is reassuring. In time, I believe we will have that information. And so I think it's coming, but it's from all accounts, it's very safe. We are up to, like I said, 85 million people have received the vaccine.
Thank you. And speaking of trials and ongoing trials, let's see, I think Nabila asked, what are the guidelines for children under 16? Are there ongoing trials for them? And when would we have those results?
So they are ongoing as we speak. The Moderna was 18 and older. The Pfizer was tested in 16 and older. Right now, I believe the trials they've started. I think the next group that may get the clearance to go would be, I believe it's maybe 11 and to 15 or 16. I'm not quite sure that the range there, but those trials are ongoing. The hope is to have something by the fall. I mean, this would be great to be able to have that, on board so that, people could feel comfortable with the schools and, and what have you. So that is coming. Hopefully we'll have it soon. I know the trials are ongoing. So.
One person asked, which vaccine is best? Should someone be worried about getting Johnson & Johnson, which has a lower effectiveness rate than Pfizer or Moderna? And what does that actually mean?
Right. So that is a great question, one that we get all the time. And I can tell you that all three vaccines were tested against the same endpoint. None of the vaccines, in terms of individuals that participated, none of the individuals were hospitalized, had serious COVID infection, or died. And so they were all tested against the same endpoint, and all three of them were 100% effective. So with that, as the backdrop, I would say whatever vaccine you can get is the vaccine that you should get, right? And so there's not a if someone wants to just take, the Johnson & Johnson because they're afraid of needles and they just want the one-time dose, then that's fine. As if someone, can get the Pfizer, if that's the only one, if you can get the Moderna, then that's fine. I don't want to, disparage anyone from getting whatever, your comfort level is different, but they were all tested and they're all against, hospitalization, serious infection, or death 100%. So I think any vaccine that you can get is the vaccine that you should get.
Thanks. Similar question or building off effectiveness. So we have several questions have come in about the different variants and the effectiveness of the vaccines against the variants. So could you speak a little bit to the situation right now with the different variants that are arising, and if you know of boosters being developed and if they will be necessary at some point in the future?
Right. So I'll take the second part of that question first. So definitely we know that most likely a booster will be needed. Now, whether that's in 1 year or 2 years, we don't know, right? But we know that the virus, if you think of it this way, the virus, it has one job, and that's to survive. It cannot survive outside of a host. So it has to find creative ways. It has to get into the body, right? And so I kind of look at it as let's see what's the best way to put this. So the virus has to do whatever it has to. If it has to change something about it to kind of, try to trick the body, it will do that. And so that's why we keep having all these variants pop up, right? Because the virus is in survival mode, right? And so but the one good thing about the vaccine is that the vaccine, particularly around the Pfizer and the Moderna, because of the messenger RNA technology, it uses a copy of the spike protein, which is the core, right? So the virus can change some aspects of its outer appearance, but it really can't change its core, right? And so at this point, the vaccine is effective because the vaccine targets the core, and the core is not changing, right? And so in my mind, it almost feels like a race against time, right? Because we know that the virus will continue to try to change, and we're going to have more and more variants. And so the more people that we can get vaccinated, the more we have a protection. And so I like to use this analogy. So think of it as this. So you have a gated community. And so a burglar, is trying to get into this community. And so it will do whatever it can to get into the community. And so you can get, so if the burglar comes in, you can't stop the burglar from trying to come and break in your house, right? So you can't stop that. But if your door is locked, they can't get in. If they do open, some manage to go in another way through a window, and you have your alarm, which is your vaccine, the burglar can't get in, right? And so to me, it's like we need to build up our alarm system. Our vaccine is the alarm system, right? And so the sooner that we can do that, and I know many have probably heard about this herd immunity, and whether or not it's, we get to 70% of people vaccinated, but we need to get to a critical mass so that we won't have to worry about these variants, right? But as long as there are a lot of folks that are not vaccinated, then the virus can kind of move around and change its appearance to try to continue to survive. So.
Thanks. All right, we are going to switch gears a little bit and go into politics and religion. So the pandemic has been highly politicized. And so we had a few people curious to know how politics has played a role in vaccine rollout, and should that involvement be a concern for Americans considering getting the vaccine?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it was so heavily politicized. I think that it did a disservice, to the whole vaccination rollout, because it was seen as something very political, right? If you were for the vaccine or certain elements of, precautions, then you were viewed to be affiliated with one political party. And then it was, there was shaming if you wanted to do something different. And so that's unfortunate. I think it worked to distract our efforts, but I think, now we're seeing, attempts to really overcome that. It made it harder, but it's not impossible. I think, more people, the more that we take this out of the political arena and leave it in the healthcare and public health space where it belongs, the less we will have of that. But it is unfortunate that did happen, but it just gives us more work and more commitment to, realign and put it back where it really belongs, which is, it's a public health issue. It's not a political issue.
Thank you. And kind of building off that focus on public health and what we can do to encourage that. I see some comments about mask use. And then I had some faith leaders curious to know what they can do to support their community, in accessing the vaccine and encouraging public health practices, even as more and more people get vaccinated. What will it look like for faith leaders in this kind of semi to post-vaccinated time?
Right. I think we have to, understand that everyone is at, many people are at different positions, right? And so I'm not a fan of, just because you are hesitant doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And so I think meeting people where they are, which is something that we in the faith community are good at, right? We understand, we meet people where they are, and then you try to, not force anybody, but you through talking and addressing their concerns. We did we took a poll, and it's not that people, and I always go back to the fact that no one wants to be ill. People want to be well. People want to enjoy time with their family. No one wants to be sick. People aren't saying I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm against vaccines, or I want to take my chance and get the coronavirus. I don't think people are really there. I think people are just nervous, and understandable. It's understandable because of how it was so political, right? There were so many things that set up the stage for concern. And so I think just, how we can support each other is something that I think comes very easy to faith leaders and to the church, because that's what our faith is based on, right? Being a support. And so I think, using that and just helping people where they are, and, and understanding, and then helping with the resources. And I think, the city, the state, have realized that we do have a problem when it comes to, equity and, health disparities, and doing what we can. And I think we accomplish so much when we just acknowledge that, that things aren't perfect, and we just try to work to see how we can, improve situations.
Thank you. So let's see, I'll come back to the chat in just a second. I have one more question, then I'm going to read the chat. So Cheryl asks, are you protected at all after the first dose?
No, you really are. Well, I take that back. So 10 days after you've had your second shot, that is when your immune system, and is at the max, right? In terms of your protection. So 10 days after your second shot. If you've gotten the Johnson & Johnson, it's 10 days after that. So if you got just one, if Johnson & Johnson is 10 days. And so I know that, when folks get vaccinated, they're like, okay, I'm vaccinated, rip off the mask and I'm out. It doesn't work that way. Your body does need to stimulate an immune response. In addition, we don't know we don't walk around with signs saying that we're vaccinated, right? And so, like I shared that analogy, and I hope it was, I know it's a bit corny, but I really want people to remember that you can't stop an exposure, right? Because, but you can stop, by wearing a mask, that's your door locked. And by getting the vaccine, that's your alarm system, right? And so keep those two things in mind. And so even though you've been vaccinated, first of all, wait the full 10 days. And the CDC has even said now that if you have been vaccinated and the members of your household have been vaccinated, you can gather in small groups with other individuals who have been vaccinated and not wear a mask, right? Because now you know that everyone in that room has been vaccinated. But again, that's that 10 days. And it's good that it's 10 days on both sides. So it's not, these different numbers for everyone to remember. Just 10 days after you're either the second shot or the first shot to be fully vaccinated. But you always want to still, wear your mask unless you are around a small group of individuals who have also been fully vaccinated.
Great. And speaking of masks, in your this is kind of a medical ethics question, but do you think a mask mandate would be something that would be helpful if required? You know, politically it might not be feasible, but even as people are getting vaccinated, as you said, we don't know who has been vaccinated and who hasn't. So would a tool like that be helpful?
So what I can say is that, every year we used to deal with a lot of, flu deaths and, complications from the flu. And we didn't see that this year. And I think in large part because folks were wearing their masks, right? And they were doing hand washing. And so all along we had the power to control this. So we've seen, we weren't focused on the flu. We were focused on the coronavirus. But guess what? We didn't really see a lot of flu. And that was in large part because people were wearing their masks. So I think if we just look back to see, how our numbers have changed and what we've done, at one point in Illinois, our positivity rate was, double digits, and to see it to come down, that's because, there were a lot of people wearing masks, right? And so I think the evidence is there. It's so unfortunate that it is, still being tossed around as a political issue. And really, again, it really isn't, it should not be a political issue. And I always say, I love data, and so just look at the numbers. And I think, it tells the story of what has been effective. If it wasn't for masks, I think we would be maybe looking at a different situation.
Thanks. So this is a question about kind of aftercare for after you get the vaccine. And from Cheryl. Is it recommended that Tylenol, ibuprofen, or other types of medicine be taken after receiving the vaccine if there's a fever or headache, body aches, or is that type of over-the-counter, medication counterproductive to the vaccine? Will it lessen its effectiveness at all?
Right. So great question. So actually you can take those things after, but do not take them before, right? So don't anticipate and take Tylenol or ibuprofen, because those things can actually blunt your immune response, right? And we don't want that, right? And so it's okay to take them afterwards if you develop, any kind of, fever, chills, or, most of what is not really a side effect, because those symptoms basically reflect the fact that your immune system has been stimulated, right? So that's what we want, right? We want, and don't be discouraged if you didn't experience those symptoms. That doesn't mean that your vaccine didn't work, not at all. Everyone's immune system is different, but those are not necessarily bad things when they occur. And so we can take Tylenol and ibuprofen. The good news is that these symptoms resolved in, 24 hours or less. And so by all means, if you want to take a Tylenol or a ibuprofen after the vaccine, if you need them, then that's fine. Just please don't take it before, because we don't want, any kind of blunting. Ibuprofen is an anti-inflammatory. We don't want that. We want your immune system to be stimulated.
Very helpful. Okay, so I have a question from Sherry asking about if houses of worship are starting to plan to resume in-person services, what are the kind of things they should focus on to prevent the spread of COVID-19?
So, we know that, distancing, and, I don't know how, I think if folks are wearing masks, that's a good, that's been shown to be effective. I think that, there's still, still need some distancing, but, as our positivity rate goes down, these restrictions and, the number of individuals that can gather will increase. And I think that would be, that's going to be great. And then as more and more people get vaccinated, that's just also going to, make things better and, make it more comfortable for us to get back together in our houses of worship.
Great. And kind of thinking about a post-pandemic world, um, how can we be better, in general? We've learned so much through this pandemic. So how can we take that to promote general preventative care, like wearing masks during flu season or other, hand washing lessons that we've learned? Do you have recommendations for how to carry that on, especially, as faith leaders, and we can encourage our communities to do that?
Yeah, I think, there's certain, we talk about going back to normal. Well, I think that there's certain things that will, I think this might be somewhat of a new normal for us. I don't see things going back to the way they were completely. I think people will always, it's going to take it's going to take some time for us to get back to a level of comfort, right? But in the meantime, there's certain things that you hit the nail on the head. I don't think I diagnosed one case of influenza this year. This was and that was something that we had struggled with for years, right? And so I think there's certain things that we need to do, whether or not it's, hand washing is something that, we tell our kids to do all the time. There's certain behaviors that have to become just, standard for us. In addition, I think one thing people have really realized, I think, during the pandemic, as people were forced to kind of be, shelter in place, just the importance of self-care and the importance of spending time with family, right? And, we were, many of us were so busy that, the coronavirus kind of slowed everybody down, right? And so I think that there's certain things, that I hope that we will take from this in terms of a sense of wellness, that we need to advocate, for ourselves and for our families, and not, and so that we don't need a pandemic to force us to sit still sometimes and to do those things. So I think there'll be a lot of lessons that come out of this, but some things like, hand washing to a greater degree, and it will be one of those. I think that is something that has proven and shown to be effective. So, and taking care of ourselves.
Self-care is definitely something we've all been learning. Um, so let's see. I think we have time for, I'm going to try to squeeze 2 more questions in. So the first one is, what is the duration of the vaccine? And I know we talked about boosters a little bit, but do we know now how long the vaccine, when we get it, will last?
Right. So there isn't a definite answer. I believe that, as in the next month or so, we'll have, more information, or once the vaccine trial participants are on a full year, we'll have known, but they're still being monitored, and they're still having very good good response rate, antibody levels. And so, we're knowing that the feeling is that it's going to be, we know that it's good for at least a year, right? So how much more, that'll be coming down the line. So, I don't think I think it's just going to be like the flu, in that, we get, a flu shot every year. I don't know that it's going to be every year, but I do think that, we definitely probably will need to have a booster, because guess what? The coronavirus, it's going to continue to try to mutate. We'll continue to have variants. And so we need to, I think we'll have to, we should realistically expect that at some point, but at least we know that so thus far it's at least a year. How much more past that, we don't have that exact data yet.
Great. All right. And then last question to close out our discussion. Thank you everyone for submitting. And I know we haven't gotten to all of them. So thank you for your understanding. The last one is, what can the faith community do to encourage our neighbors to get vaccinated?
Share what you've learned today, right? I think some of the most powerful testimonies are when we just talk to each other, right? So I'm grateful for the opportunity to, talk to you, but I'm hoping that, something that I shared, a lot of what I shared hopefully resonates, and that you would share it with your neighbors, share it with your friends, share it with your family member, talk to people. Sometimes, we're often afraid to, ask people, oh, did you get the vaccine? Or how do you feel about the vaccine, right? If you don't want to ask somebody if they got it, just how do you feel, about the vaccine, and look for those opportunities to kind of share some information, because, I always go back to everyone wants to be well. No one wants to be sick. And so sometimes, people may think that they're the only ones. And so making it comfortable to have conversations with, it's easy to sometimes talk to your family, talk to your neighbor. How do you feel about this? And then share something that you heard today. And I think that's how we kind of help people. And we should look for those opportunities. I know at least once a month I volunteer at a church on the South Side, where they open their doors and we give vaccines out of the church location through the city and Howard Brown. And so, I think, being, not only talking to the members, but opening the doors, right? And the city is always looking for, sites in the communities that they can help and, and get vaccine, and you partner with an organization, and, they can come out, and that's a great way to get to members of congregations, if that's what, faith leaders would like to do. There's plenty of organizations that are interested and willing to partner with churches, because we really want to get, we're all in this together. I always tell people, and that's why I start off by saying the coronavirus does not discriminate. This is not just, all of us can be affected. All of us are affected. And we only get out of this when we work together. And so I think it's, it's whatever, all hands on deck is really the way I look at it. And, the fact that we could be on the other side of this, and, next year, this time is going to be a result of everyone being all hands on deck. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. And so everyone, the resources that Dr. Prendergast shared during her talk are linked in the chat, the different site locations. And if you have questions, feel free to email us, and I will include, I'm going to chat my email, and we will find resources or ways to connect you. So feel free to reach out. And then also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have just a 3-minute, it's a pretty quick survey. And we will have 2 gift cards that will go out to people that fill out the survey. I just linked it. So if you can take the time to fill out that survey and just share a little bit about your views on the vaccine, and if what you learned tonight, and then you'll be entered to win one of the 2 $50 gift cards. So an easy way to win some money. And then if this type of webinar is something you would like to host or share with your house of worship or faith community or organization, again, feel free to reach out to me. We would love to host these kinds of webinars with more faith communities and share this type of information as people are kind of grappling with what the vaccine means for their community. So feel free to shoot me an email. And then last but not least, Faith in Place is on social media. Tonight's webinar was live streamed to Facebook. So if that's the easiest way for you to share with your community, you can just hit share on the post. And then we'll also be sending out this recording by email, and it'll be published on YouTube. So there'll be lots of ways to share it. So if you know someone that could benefit from the information. I know I listen to a lot of vaccine webinars and podcasts all the time, and I still learned a ton of things tonight. So I think there's great information shared, and I really want to thank Dr. Prendergast for joining us and making this event possible. And so it is 8 o'clock on the dot, and I think that wraps us up for the evening. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I hope to see you at similar events in the future. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.